are starting to gain some traction. Now, the question facing lawmakers in Washington, D.C. is Congress going to be engaged in an effort of putting in place the kinds of policies that will support that recovery?
Charles, both the jobs numbers and also the possible impact of the sequester on the economy.
Look, the sequester is less than 1/2 of 1% of the economy. If you believe the CBO, the actual cuts this year will be half of that, so it'll be 1/4 of 1%. The idea that it's going to cause a stalling of the economy or dramatic drop is ridiculous. And as we saw in the current numbers, what's happening is that government jobs are going down and they're being replaced by jobs in the private sector, which is exactly what you want for a government which is hugely in debt, $16 trillion in debt, running $1 trillion debts all the time. It strengthens the economy if you can cut down on the size of government and end up with the jobs in the private sector, which is exactly what's happening. I think ultimately underlying all of this is the fact that after half a decade, the housing hit the bottom, and now it's rising again. And with that, you get essentially a bottom underneath, underpinning the entire economy, because it creates all kinds of jobs in construction and all kinds of other industries. And I think that's probably the engine underneath, and it looks really good if government will get out of the way.
This brings us to the president's so-called charm offensive to try to undo the sequester with a grand bargain, another attempt at a grand bargain. And this week he met with a dozen Republican rank and file, not Senate leaders, for dinner on Wednesday night. And then he met with Paul Ryan, the head of the House Budget Committee, and also the Democratic ranking member, Chris Van Hollen, on Thursday. How sincere do you think the president is in reaching out to Republicans and trying to work out a deal to undo the sequester?
Strangely enough, I remain uncharmed. I hate to be cynical about this, but if you're not, it's hard to understand the president's actions. What's happened in the last couple of weeks, the only thing that truly changed is that his numbers have gone down from the mid to high 50s into the 40s. And the only thing that's happened in the real world is he tried to exploit the sequester, with predictions of the apocalypse, and then with sort of the petty actions like shutting the tours in the White House. And what happened is Obama's strongest constituency, which is not the left, it's the mainstream media, could no longer cover for him without being entirely embarrassed. It had to expose the one exaggeration after another on the sequester, the stuff about the janitors being laid off and all that, which wasn't so. And secondly, the obvious cynicism of White House tours, trying to inflict the maximum pain in order to make a case and to blame Republicans. That kind of partisanship has worked for the president since election day and through the fiscal cliff, but it crashed on the sequester, and that's why I think he's had to recalculate, and now he's become extremely charming.
But you remain uncharmed.
I remain uncharmed.
Not charming enough.
Chuck, are you?
Because I remain highly cynical.
30 seconds left in this segment. You get to give the tiebreakers.
I'm more cynical than Charles. And in order to believe that the president is sincere here, you'd have to accept that the president is now believing in a means, bipartisanship, that he rejected throughout most of his first term, towards an end, cutting spending and reducing the debt, that he's never seemed to care much about. It makes no sense whatsoever on its face, and Republicans ought to be very cautious as they enter into these talks. Do everything in public, and the only time you get serious is if the president says, I am for X entitlement.
Well, it was at a public restaurant, so at least they're taking that piece of your advice.
Well, senators at dinner. That's the same number as the number of apostles. I don't want to draw a meaning out of that. I just wanted to point it out.
Wow. All right. We have taken.
If this man, right next to Osama bin Laden, is involved in the attacks on our country on 9/11, don't you think it would be important that we not tell him he has the right to remain silent?
They don't want to is not a rationale. It's completely irrational. Even if you opposed the creation of Guantanamo at the beginning, it exists. There's no way it's going to shut. Administration committed to shutting it has now shut down the office that would shut it down. So if it is here, it's the place where you could hold him and question him over years if you have to. Why do you give him his Miranda rights?
North Korea, which this week upped its threats, its warnings to levels even extraordinary for North Korea and the new leader there, Kim Jong-un, actually talking about a preemptive nuclear strike against its enemies, including the U.S.
Well, it could be that he's getting pressure from elders and others in the military.
With all the rhetoric, the North Koreans are masking a deep insecurity and weakness.
All of these are rational answers, but there's a third choice, that he's nuts. After all, he and Dennis Rodman got along extremely well. There is a history of rulers who were nuts. Caligula made a horse into a senator, so it's happened before. And if he is, he could be entirely irrational. Now, the military will try to contain him, but I wouldn't underestimate the influence of craziness in world history. We certainly saw it in the 20th century.
30 seconds, winners and losers.
The big winner of the week unequivocally is Rand Paul. He pulled off a theatrical coup. He picked the right issue. How many Americans are there who believe that Obama, on a whim, has a right to put a drone-launched missile through their living room? It's a small constituency. The loser, Bolivia, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and Cuba. The death of Hugo Chavez means that in time, not immediately, they are going to lose the billions of oil dollars that Chavez had lavished upon them.
This has been a Sunfish production.